Laura and Daniel Thompson were the picture of suburban perfection, a loving marriage, beautiful children, and a life most people envied. But behind Daniel's polished smile was a dark secret, a criminal empire built on fraud, drugs, and violence. When Laura uncovered the truth, she didn't just threaten his empire, she signed her own death warrant. What began as a perfect love story ended in betrayal, murder, and a chilling fight for justice that would expose everything Daniel tried to bury. Laura and Daniel Thompson were the kind of couple that people envied. They had the house with the white fence, 2 smiling kids, and a life that looked straight out of a glossy magazine. Friends would often talk about how lucky Laura was to have a husband like Daniel. He was charming, successful, and generous. Their family vacations were the kind others could only dream about. Ski trips in winter, beach resorts in summer, and luxury getaways sprinkled throughout the year. The two of them would post smiling photos online, showing off expensive restaurants and weekend adventures. On the surface, it was the picture of happiness. Daniel's success came from his chain of car dealerships. Everyone in their town seemed to know his name. His businesses were booming, his face appeared in local commercials, and he was often invited to charity events. Laura had been a school teacher before they married, but after their second child was born, she left work to focus on raising the children. Daniel insisted she didn't need to work anymore. With the life he was providing, why should she? Laura trusted him, believed in him, and thought she was building a beautiful life alongside a hardworking, devoted man. But behind the smiles and luxury, Daniel was hiding something dangerous. He had worked hard to maintain the image of a clean businessman, but his world was built on lies. Years earlier, when one of his dealerships struggled, Daniel had accepted help from the wrong people. That help came with strings attached, pulling him deeper into organized crime. Soon, the dealerships became the perfect way to launder large sums of dirty money. Drug deals, arms trades, and fraudulent loans funneled through fake car sales and service invoices. It was a perfect cover, and for years, nobody suspected a thing. Not his friends, not his customers, and certainly not his wife. That illusion started to fall apart the day Laura found a folder she wasn't meant to see. While cleaning Daniel's home office, she stumbled across files labeled with strange numbers and offshore bank names. At first, she didn't understand what she was looking at, but the more she read, the more it terrified her. Hidden accounts in foreign countries, massive sums being moved in and out under fake names, and a network of companies she had never heard of. None of it made sense to her at first, but one thing was clear. Daniel wasn't the man she thought she married. Laura's heart sank as she realized the life she was living was built on crime. Everything, the house, the vacations, the cars, was paid for by illegal deals and dirty money. She felt trapped in a beautiful prison, surrounded by luxury that now made her sick to her stomach. And the worst part was that she had no idea how far Daniel's lies went, or how dangerous the people around him might be. The perfect life she thought she had was cracking wide open, and Laura was standing at the edge of something far darker than she could have imagined. Laura's discovery of Daniel's secret life sent her into a state of constant anxiety. Each day felt like walking through a minefield, unsure of which step might trigger an explosion. But instead of confronting Daniel right away, she decided to play it smart. She knew that rushing into a confrontation without understanding the full picture could put her in danger. Quietly, she began digging deeper, careful not to leave any signs that she knew anything. Late at night, when Daniel was asleep or away on business trips, she'd go back into the home office and search through files, email drafts, and hidden folders on his laptop. The more she uncovered, the more terrified she became. It wasn't just money laundering for local criminals. It was organized, large-scale crime. Daniel was involved with a syndicate that dealt in illegal weapons, narcotics distribution, and even human trafficking on an international scale. His dealerships were just one piece of a massive web of shell companies and offshore accounts that stretched across multiple countries. What shocked Laura the most wasn't just the scale of the operation, but how ordinary her life still felt on the outside. School runs, grocery shopping, parent-teacher conferences, everything looked so normal, hiding a secret that could get them all killed. At first, she thought about going to the police, but fear paralyzed her. If she went to law enforcement, would they believe her? Would they be able to protect her? What if Daniel found out? What if the people he worked for found out? The weight of those unknowns pushed her to look for a safer option. That's when she reached out anonymously to a local investigative journalist known for covering political corruption and organized crime. Using a burner phone, she made first contact, sending the journalist snapshots of the documents she'd found. The journalist didn't waste time. He started cross-referencing the names of companies, offshore banks, and aliases mentioned in the documents. Within weeks, whispers began circulating in certain online spaces about a successful businessman with deep criminal ties. Laura kept close watch on every article, every post, feeling the noose tightening around her home. The journalist promised that the evidence she provided could blow the lid off the entire operation, but they needed more. Dates, transactions, names of key players. Laura agreed to help, terrified but determined to bring the truth to light. Meanwhile, Daniel noticed subtle changes in the air. Conversations would pause when he entered rooms. Some business partners avoided his calls. Rumors were circling, and he knew something wasn't right. He started going over his own communications, his emails, his meeting notes, until he finally noticed unusual login activity on one of his secured folders. Slowly, piece by piece, he realized that someone close to him had betrayed him. And the closer he looked, the more obvious it became that Laura had been the one behind it all. Daniel wasn't just worried about being exposed. He was terrified of the people he worked for finding out. If they learned he was careless enough to let his wife leak information, they wouldn't just come for Laura. They would come for him too. In Daniel's mind, there was only one way to stop the collapse of everything he had built. The tension inside the Thompson household reached a breaking point as Daniel's suspicions toward Laura grew stronger. The man who once showered her with affection now barely spoke a word unless it was sharp or cold. His charm was gone, replaced by silent glares and a heavy sense of distrust that filled every corner of the house. Laura felt like a stranger in her own home, living with a man who looked like her husband but carried the energy of a predator watching its prey. Every movement she made was calculated, every conversation rehearsed in her mind. She knew the walls were closing in, but she had no idea how fast they were moving. Eventually, Laura decided she couldn't stay in the same house as Daniel. Under the guise of needing space for her mental health, she packed up the kids and moved into a small rented apartment on the other side of town. To friends and family, it looked like a temporary separation, marital struggles that happened to many couples. But underneath the polite explanations was raw fear. Laura knew that staying in the house meant constantly being watched, constantly fearing that Daniel would discover just how much she knew. And now that pieces of the story were beginning to surface online, she felt like a ticking bomb. Daniel, on the other hand, was losing control. The empire he had spent years building was cracking under his feet, and he was running out of time to cover his tracks. His legitimate businesses were under more scrutiny. New customers started asking strange questions. Calls from overseas associates were no longer friendly but demanding. The journalist working with Laura was carefully leaking pieces of information, enough to spark curiosity without giving away everything. Each leak was like a stab wound to Daniel's carefully crafted public image. It was only a matter of time before someone connected all the dots. Laura underestimated the depths of Daniel's desperation. He wasn't just afraid of legal trouble. He was afraid of the men above him in the criminal world. If they thought he had become a liability, Daniel knew they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate him. The thought of losing his wealth, reputation, freedom, and possibly his life pushed him into a cold, calculating mindset. To him, Laura was no longer his wife. She was a threat that could destroy not just him, but their children's future, their safety, and the fragile power he had spent years holding on to. What made the situation even more dangerous was that Laura still didn't fully grasp just how far Daniel was willing to go. She believed that his criminal connections might threaten her or scare her into silence, but the idea that he could take it further hadn't yet solidified in her mind. She was focused on protecting her children and exposing the truth. What she didn't realize was that Daniel was already working on a plan that involved removing her from the equation entirely. The marriage was over, but the real war was just beginning. Laura never imagined that stepping out of her marriage would turn into a fight for her life. After moving into her modest apartment with the kids, she tried to build a sense of normalcy. School drop-offs, grocery shopping, and quiet evenings became her routine. But behind every moment was a growing fear. She noticed cars she didn't recognize parked across the street, people who seemed to linger a little too long near her building, unfamiliar footsteps in hallways late at night. At first, she tried to convince herself it was just paranoia, but deep down she knew the truth. Someone was watching her. Daniel had already made his decision. His connections weren't just useful for moving money or securing shady deals. They were also skilled at making people disappear. He contacted an enforcer within his criminal circle, a man known for handling problems quietly. The instructions were simple. Follow Laura, learn her habits, and wait for the right opportunity to make it look like a random act of violence. It had to be quick, brutal, and clean. No ties leading back to Daniel, no loose ends. For weeks, Laura unknowingly lived under surveillance. Every errand, every meeting, every drive was noted and tracked. Eventually, a pattern emerged. Late in the evenings, after putting her children to bed with a sitter or relative, Laura would often drive to meet with her lawyer or the journalist helping her uncover Daniel's crimes. These nighttime drives were vulnerable moments, especially when she returned alone to the dark, mostly empty parking garage of her building. It was the perfect place to make a move without drawing attention. One evening, just as planned, Laura returned from a late meeting. The garage was dimly lit, silent, except for the faint hum of distant traffic. As she stepped out of her car, the attacker emerged from the shadows. The attack was sudden and brutal. It was over in seconds. The killer left everything untouched, her purse, her keys, even her phone still in her hand. To any observer, it would look like a mugging gone wrong, but to anyone who knew Laura's situation, it was clear. This was a hit. The next morning, news of Laura's murder sent shockwaves through the community. Friends, neighbors, and former colleagues were devastated. Vigils were organized. Candlelight memorials lined the street near her apartment. To the outside world, it was a senseless act of violence against a kind, innocent woman. But to those paying closer attention, especially the journalists she'd been helping, it smelled of something far more sinister. Daniel played his part well. He appeared on local news, grief-stricken, holding his children close, offering rewards for any information that might lead to his wife's killer. Cameras captured his tears, his trembling voice, his broken fatherly image. But underneath the performance was cold calculation. As far as he was concerned, the threat was gone. The leaks would stop. The journalist would have nothing left to build his story. Daniel thought he had won. What he didn't know was that his greatest mistake was still to come. For a while, it looked like Daniel had succeeded. The police followed standard procedures, treating Laura's death as a random violent crime. Without any immediate suspects or stolen property, leads were scarce. The case teetered on the edge of going cold, just another unsolved tragedy in a city that had seen its fair share. Daniel returned to his routine, carefully managing his businesses, playing the part of the grieving husband, and making sure the public focus stayed on his sorrow rather than his secrets. The children were kept out of the spotlight, protected by extended family, while Daniel publicly promised justice for his late wife. But what Daniel didn't anticipate was the strength of the journalist Laura had trusted. Driven by guilt and determination, the journalist refused to let her death disappear into the shadows. He intensified his investigation, now with personal stakes attached. Over the months, he followed paper trails, tracked down former employees of Daniel's dealerships, and uncovered links to offshore accounts connected to illegal trades. Slowly, a web began to form, one that stretched from suburban showrooms to foreign criminal enterprises. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. One of Daniel's longtime associates, a mid-level operative in the syndicate, was arrested in a separate sting operation involving narcotics trafficking. Facing a crushing sentence, the associate decided to cut a deal with federal authorities. In exchange for a reduced sentence, He provided detailed accounts of the operation Daniel had built, including names, dates, transactions, and most importantly, proof that Daniel had ordered Laura's murder to protect his empire. The evidence was damning. There were encrypted text messages, burner phone records, wire transfers to the hired killer, and logs of meetings that lined up perfectly with Laura's final days. Federal agents, now fully aware of the scale of Daniel's criminal enterprise, launched coordinated raids on his properties, seizing documents, freezing assets, and arresting key figures connected to the organization. Daniel was arrested in his office, still wearing the mask of a respectable businessman. The trial that followed was one of the most publicized in the region's history. Prosecutors presented a clear timeline of events, from Laura's discovery of the hidden documents to the steps Daniel took to silence her. Witnesses came forward, former employees, disgruntled partners, and even relatives who had long suspected that Daniel was living a double life. The most powerful moment in court came when Laura's recordings and documents, saved on encrypted drives she had hidden before her death, were played for the jury. Her voice, steady but fearful, told the story of betrayal and courage in the face of overwhelming danger. Daniel was found guilty on all charges: money laundering, conspiracy, and the murder of his wife. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. His businesses were liquidated, his reputation destroyed, and his name forever associated with betrayal and murder. Laura's story became a symbol of bravery, a reminder of the risks people face when exposing the powerful. Daniel thought he had buried the truth, but in the end, it was the truth that buried him.